Hello, welcome to episode 24 of The Great Game. In this episode, we were lucky enough to sit down and talk with Justin from Adelaide Megagames, co-original designer of So Say We All, and also with Tristan Cliff from Melbourne Megagames, who worked with Justin late last year in helping redesign the game and ran So Say We All in Melbourne late 2023. We delve into a little bit about the game, a little bit about the redesign process, and also a little bit about Justin's experience being a player in the game that he had originally created back in 2019. There is a previous episode 4 of the podcast back in 2020, where we originally talked to Justin and James, also from Sydney, about the original creation of the game. So if you want a bit of a prequel, check that out. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. So we are back here today, actually recording in 2024 now. Happy New Year to you all. Today, Jack and I are having a chat to Tristan and Justin about So Say We All, two people that we've had on the podcast before, and a game that we've had on the podcast before, but it's all new content. So Tristan, we talked to you not too long ago, 2022, episode 15, It Belongs in a Museum with Nelly. Did you want to just reiterate to anyone listening who you are and where you're from and how you got into all this?
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Tristan. I'm the secretary of Melbourne Megagames down in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, a place I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and if you're not, you're always welcome to come along. I was one of the co-founders of Melbourne Megagames. I got into games, Megagames specifically, when Pulp Megagames, who used to exist in Geelong, ran Watch the Skies, that famous starter for us all, down there way back in 2017, running games up here. Yeah, and super excited to chat through So Say We All. It'll be a very interesting conversation today.
And yeah, it does feel like an age ago when Pulp was running Watch the Skies. I think a few of us regulars across the country were there for that one.
Yes, even that IBAM conversation was a long time ago. Much has changed for us.
Much has changed. And Justin, we spoke to you in 2020, almost 4 years ago, about this very game. Did you want to just intro where you're coming from?
Hi everyone, I'm Justin. I'm formerly of Sydney Megagamers and now one of the founders of Adelaide Megagames, also in Australia. And yeah, I've been a Megagame addict ever since Pat ran his very first game in 2015, and I've stuck with it ever since.
And you came up with So Say We All, 2020, was it?
I don't know if I could say I came up with it.
No, claim credit. It's all yours. No one else had any part in it.
It's a unique idea. But that was...
I translated it into the Megagame format, I think is the generous way of saying it.
Yep, with James, who is also Sydney Megagamers. And then obviously we did speak to you not too long ago on a different subject, but I am not sure which order these episodes are going to come out on. So you may have heard from Justin recently when we were talking about Watch the Skies over in Adelaide. But anyway, no further introductions. Let's get into it. So Say We All.
Absolutely. Tristan, for those who haven't heard about the game before, we obviously have the whole episode on it, but could you quickly run us through what the game's about and what made you choose to run it?
At a high level, given that obviously the episode, if you want to get into detail of the episode exists, I encourage you to go listen to that. But at a high level, it's based, I won't talk to all the inspirations, but based loosely on Battlestar Galactica and Stargate Universe, where the vestiges, the last grasp of humanity is stuck on a ship or a set of ships, a fleet that is fleeing from an unknown enemy. In this case, the only thing we know about them, they're named the Ashiva. And humanity is running away from these Ashiva after a devastating attack. And they're guided and shepherded, if you will, by the one sole old battleship, Prosecutor. And the Prosecutor and a bunch of civilian ships are running through space, lost, either trying to find their way to safety or just back to Earth if it still exists, if it's still relevant. and that's a set of teams. So each player plays a crew member on a ship, part of the command crew. There's 4 crew members on each of the civilian ships, and there's 5 on the prosecutor specifically. And that makes up, there's 11 ships total fleet. And then there is additionally, there are 2 Ashiva ships. Sorry to spoil the details. A couple of Ashiva ships in an Ashiva fleet that are playing a separate game, chasing down humans. It's a really interesting game in that it does the things that other mega games don't do, and that's one of the things we were looking at. In particular, the hidden trader mechanics. So, for those of you that know the source material, Battlestar Galactica, the Cylons in that material have actually evolved from being like these silver metal robots that look like toasters into being basically human facsimiles. So they look like people, they sound like people, they smell like people, they even feel like people, as famously demonstrated in that show. And so to emulate that, and the really unique part of So Say We All is that there are a set of infiltrators allocated among the fleet. No one knows who those infiltrators are until game day. We can talk a little bit about how we went around allocating and assigning those infiltrators in our run-throughs of the game, but it creates this really interesting hidden information, don't trust anyone dynamic as a part of running So Say We All, because both for players and for control. You have to manage your interactions with players as control, and as players, you're obviously tempering all of your interactions through the lens of, can you trust people around you? Whew! Did that an overlay of the game make sense?
I think so. I think you covered everything, and we can probably wrap it up there. I do want to ask Tristan, just before we move on, like we are going to talk about those trader mechanics a little bit.
Yep.
Was this the first game with that kind of mechanic?
Yeah.
Like specifically built in that
Melbourne
has run?
Yeah, it is. So we try at Melbourne Megagames to pick different games, expose our players to games, and different, not just different games thematically, but different games from a mechanical perspective as well. So obviously we've run a bunch of different games in the past. You can check them out on our website, and I'll give plugs to that later. But when we looked at So Say We All, with a few things really appealed to us. Firstly, a sci-fi genre and a sci-fi theme. I'm a massive BSG fan, so that obviously helped attract us there. And we know our player base loves a sci-fi game, so that was obviously sort of a thematic, a really good pick, and it was really varied compared to the other games we'd run earlier that year. So we ran Phase Anatomy earlier 2023, which is obviously whimsical fairy land. You can again listen to plentiful podcasts. Do you guys have a podcast on Phase Anatomy as well, Pat?
We don't yet. No, that's
no.
Might be on the cards.
Might be on the cards, but I know there's a Megagame Assembly podcast about it. I think.
Yep.
That's worth listening to hear about that game. But that was obviously whimsy, fairy, hospital management stuff, and very different to running from aliens in space. And sort of everyone was almost cooperative in Phase Anatomy, so it was really good to see the other side of the coin. And one of the things that really attracted us to So Say We All was that like distrust and the element of betrayal's a real and viable problem in this game for players to encounter. And that was really part of selecting the game. The third thing that I want to touch on really importantly is that the game's actually like it's an Australian game, and that's really important to us, that we get to showcase amazing Australian designers, amazing Australian ingenuity, and support and iterate on Australian mega gaming as it matures into the modern space it is. We aren't all fortunate enough to have Pat who can spit out a mega game every 6 months.
I feel like that's setting me up for something, but it is good to see the game run again, and so many games being designed here. This was the second time this had been run, Justin?
That's right, yep.
Yeah. And so we were talking just a little bit before we started recording about you getting to play your game this time round, as opposed to being just the sole designer and then running it. Well, not the sole designer, but, being in the back room for the entire thing. What was that experience like?
It was it was really interesting. It was an option that was floated to me and to James. He was also there, by Tristan and the crew at Melbourne Megagames. And we kind of ummed and ahed about it for a while. We're like, oh, do we really want to do this? Like, what if it's a disaster?
Mm-hmm.
But then the thing that kind of won me over was actually that line of thinking. I was like, oh, if there's something terrible about the game, I want to kind of experience it firsthand. So that was what sealed it for me. I was like, okay, I'm going to go into the game and kind of try and find things that are not good. So it was mostly trying to refine my craft was
Right.
why I wanted to play it.
And I'm keen
Nice.
to go into detail a bit later on, but did that work out for you? Did you walk away from this thinking, all right, I know how to make this 10 times better now? Or, I know how to
I don't
patch
know
up
about
the
10
next one.
times better, but yeah, there definitely were some valuable things I gleaned from experiencing it as a player that otherwise I may not have had the opportunity to find out about.
Awesome.
Just because not every player's feedback makes it to you when you run a game.
Awesome. So, I understand that quite a bit changed since the first run of the game in Wollongong. How did that reworking process, work, and kind of what did that look like? Kind of reworking and twisting stuff and changing it up.
So I think it was probably like a 2-phase kind of project to revamp the game. Initially, it started with just myself and James. After having some conversations with Tristan and the Melbourne crew, they had asked us what kind of state the game was in, and we'd indicated there were some areas we weren't happy with since we ran it in Wollongong back in 2019, and that we wanted to refine. So we kind of undertook that initial refinement, changing things that we thought were clumsy or that had become irrelevant, and just kind of did a large scale kind of rule overhaul to get it into a state that we were more satisfied with. And then once that was done, then we undertook the second kind of phase of the rework, which was a lot more collaborative with Tristan and Leon from Melbourne to kind of do a thematic overhaul of especially of like the Ashiva team, the enemy alien team that's off in their secret room doing their secret things. That was one area we had flagged that was worth kind of delving into and giving a bit more care and attention to it. And so, and then we didn't want to prescribe to Tristan and to Leon and to Melbourne, how that should be. We really were keen to get their feedback on what sort of game they wanted to run and what sort of things they wanted to explore with that part of the game.
Can I think it's really interesting actually to explain the timeline of. So we first started looking at running this game at the end of 2022, and by looking at running this game, I mean literally that was us getting in touch. Me reaching out to Pat, being like, "We've heard this game exists. We've spoken to you about it before. Who do I have to talk to about this?" And Pat putting us onto Justin, and Justin saying, "Yeah, we're happy for you to run the game, but there's all this." That's when that first conversation happened about this. Actually, there's a bunch of stuff we want to change here. But it wasn't until we came up and played, a bunch of the Melbourne Megagames crew came up and played God Emperor in Sydney, that we actually were finally able to nail down this is kind of what we want to do. And that was sort of the first half of 2023. April, Pat, I think.
May.
Was May. May was that game, was that
yep.
run. And then, so by then that's when really, so Justin and James after that really kicked into gear. And we actually had a no-go call about whether we were going to run the game or not. Just peeling back the curtain for you. I think early September was when we finally sat down and said, is this, are you guys happy enough that you've done the work that you want it to be, that we can take it from here? And that's when that second pass sort of happened. So it was really quite a lot of work for, obviously May to September, and obviously longer as Justin and James were iterating on their design. But then even more happened, and it happened all the way through. So in between both runs of the game, so we actually ran the game twice. There were 3 weeks between run 1 and run 2 of the game down here in Melbourne. And we even iterated on and changed some of the mechanics, just tinkering, sort of refining bits and bobs here and there. Especially the combat, which Nelly from our side worked really hard on, sort of tidying up some of the rules explanations and reordering some of the balance changes that have been made to make it flow a bit more smoothly. But that happened all the way through to game day of the second run. So this process of redesign sort of started in May and ran all the way through to December.
Very nice, very intense process. That's awesome. Well, let's a quick spoiler warning, but let's talk about some of those thematic changes you talked about with the Ashiva enemy team. What were the big changes you wanted to put in place there?
So, Justin, do you want to outline the issue that was there that you saw after the first run of the game in Wollongong, and kind of the problem statement that we had?
Sure. Yeah. So after we ran it back in 2019, I mean, even going into the game in 2019, James and I were very conscious that the aside from their overarching goal of destroying the human fleet, the Yeshiva team, what else was it going to be doing? Because you can't occupy, a 6-ish hour game with just that. They need to have. They won't always be, in combat with the human teams or masterminding some kind of scheme. They need to have things to do in between. And we kind of just winged it in 2019. We had a really good member of our control team, Griff, who also came down to play in the 2023 game in Melbourne. And he just kind of took all of that on. We discussed it ahead of time, and he was kind of happy just to take it and run with it. But that was, that's a bit precarious, especially if you're dumping a game onto another group. We really didn't want to just say, "Oh, this is completely open ended," and
Just
good
do
luck.
what you
Make
want.
sure you do something interesting with it. So I wanted to kind of make that a bit more substantive.
Yeah. And so, actually, what worked really well is Justin had a few sort of launching off points, and then it was throwing ideas down on paper in terms of brainstorming and coming up with ideas. We went back and forward, but something that's really strong thematically in the source material is basically the idea of conflict of religion. And in the source material, the aliens have a monotheistic religion, and humanity has a polytheistic religion. Both made up, and so we kind of took that as a bit of an inspiration for the Yeshiva. And so this is really a spoiler warning, but basically we settled on like drawing in another source material of Halo as inspiration for the Yeshiva being not just one species, but being a conglomeration of multiple species and races that have come together under sort of one religion, and giving space for them to play and have justification for the conflict be almost a religious one, which is very close to the source material, and kind of bringing that extra theme a bit on board where it wasn't necessarily present in the first run of the game. The other thing that we looked at doing mechanically, we made a bunch of mechanical changes for the Yeshiva. I think the Yeshiva rulebook sort of had the back 2/3 ripped off of it and then sort of rebundled in throughout the rewrite. But we actually gave them an NPC. So I've spoken many times before about how much I love the God Emperor as a mechanic, as the NPC role of the God Emperor themselves directly. I think that if you've got great control, then great NPCs elevate a game from really good to great to brilliant. And so that was the plan here, and it gave us actually scope to have the Yeshiva have their own game that they're playing, which is actually convincing this NPC called the Shiv, who's like the fleet commander of the Yeshiva fleet, that their actions and the specific tasks they want to do are the righteous path for the Yeshiva. And so within the 6-player Yeshiva team, we actually split their motivations down the line and sort of came up with a faction of the purists, a faction of the shepherds, who are ideologically opposed to what the pragmatic solution to humanity being not part of the Yeshiva was, right? Where the purists were sort of leaning towards burning them from the galaxy, and the shepherds believed that they were just misguided, a young misguided race that needed to be taught the light, basically, of Shiva religion. And so that was a really interesting. It resulted in a really interesting space where we not only had that whole game sphere sort of matured and developed mechanically, right? In that there's literally the result of this negotiation isn't a vote or anything. It's convincing this one NPC of your argument, right? That's how the mechanical negotiation sphere resolves. It's that person, that NPC's decision. But it also lets you actually balance and guide the Yeshiva actions quite strongly, right? Because you've got a person in there that can respond to them in real time. That is, one of your control team. They're one of your moderators, even if they're not, necessarily wearing a badge that says mod on it.
I love that. I love yeah. I'm a huge fan, obviously, of that mixing in that type of role playing and NPC interaction. Yeah, how did you find that they people responded to that in practice on the day?
There's sort of two sets of reactions. The first one is just at a theatrical level. Having the Shiv wander through the tables of humanity at times led all the human players to be like, what the hell's happening here? Like, who's this person? What are they doing? Even just the way we got them so we introduced all our control at the start of the day. Say, hi, my name's Tristan. I live in this role during the day. And when it came to our Shiv both times, they said, hi. My name is X, and if you need to know what I do, you already know, and then walked away. And like that was a great theatrical moment right at the start of the day. But yeah, actually for the Yeshiva players, they had a really engaging time. We found that they had so much more to do. Both games, we actually sort of overbalanced in both games and ended up having to direct them more back to play with humanity, because not only do they have so much to do themselves in their own room, but we needed to we gave them some other side objectives as well, so that they weren't, if something bad happened with humanity, they had other paths to go down, and they took up those so strongly that we had to sort of use the Shiv to nudge them back towards fighting humanity, which worked really well. They had a really engaging time. Both runs of the game, the Shiv was they had different. Obviously, it's very personal when you've sort of got six people in a room that you have to manage.
Absolutely.
Like, it depends on the personalities of the players. But we were really lucky to have two fantastic Shiv control / NPC people. Yolanda Diamantis, who's part of Melbourne Megagames, was the first run, and Jace Best, she was the Shiv in the second game, and they're both brilliant role players and able to sort of respond fast on their feet, and that really helped. I think it led to the Yeshiva having a really almost the best days out of both runs with the responses for our Shiva players.
I guess I want to clarify too, Justin, as a player, what role were you filling in this game when you went to play?
I was playing as the crew chief of one of the civilian ships.
Right.
Essentially, my job as the crew chief was to manage the resources of my team, decide where our crew was being put to use, if they were being sent to other ships or to work aboard our ship, and then to dole out our food and our fuel as appropriate or as I saw fit.
So I guess from my understanding of the game, I suppose you probably didn't have a huge amount of interaction with the Yeshiva, but from as that sort of secret designer amongst the players, how did you receive the changes to the team on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, it was strange because I wasn't really surprised by any of it, so it was hard to shake that kind of, oh, I know exactly what's going on here,
Right.
kind of mindset. And so it was tough at times not to like go to our like the captain on our team and kind of nudge them and be like, you should really be doing this thing to like to deal with this problem. And just kind of, allowing the players to have that moment in the game, which I think is pretty crucial, where there's always at some point in a mega game where you kind of are floundering a bit.
Mm.
And I think you just kind of you need that little bit of desperation mixed in with your game just to really kind of make it a full, complete, enjoyable experience. If everything goes your way all day, it can become, not as satisfying. So
Definitely.
yeah, I don't know. It was yeah, I'm not I'm still even now not I don't have a complete opinion on what my experience was as a player, because there was so much that I was expecting. But then yeah, there were times where I was surprised, and and it was all just neat, and yeah,
Mm.
every time I was surprised, it was nice. I was like, oh, this is cool.
I'm
Yeah,
glad we were
lovely.
able to surprise you at least a couple of
That's-
times throughout
That's
the day.
Good.
one hell
That's-
of an endorsement on
Yeah,
the,
I think-
on the front cover.
No,
This
well,
is
I think
cool.
it's no mean feat, considering that it's literally one of your brainchild, right? And it's I'm particularly proud actually of the way that our control team worked throughout both days. Something else that was changed between the Wollongong run and the Melbourne runs of the game was we actually added a couple more teams in the civilian ships as well. Justin came up with the idea, and then my creative brain went wild with coming up with 3 new ships. So actually, the game expanded by 12 players. And one of the ships, again on the religious side that we added, is called the Constantine. Which my pitch to everyone when we were talking about the ship was, it's just the Pope Mobile. It's nothing beyond that. Imagine the Pope had a spaceship. But we didn't provide any guidance as to what the religion was for the players, so they were sort of given inspiration to come up with they wanted in both games. But it was there to give a little bit of the religious sort of bite back against the Yeshiva. But it didn't actually end up going that well in the second game, because they just decided that their religion had been the Yeshiva religion all along and assimilated their way into the Yeshiva. Yeah, there was a schism in the fleet in humanity in the second game, and resulted in a few ships joining the Yeshiva, being like, "Yeah, we want this." And so one of those was the Constantine, the religious ship, who said, "Well, actually, it's the same religion," which was an interesting resolution that I certainly didn't foresee before the day.
Nice. And you mentioned the combat stuff changed up as well in between the first and second runs. What were those changes, and how did those end up playing out?
Yeah, so I have to admit I'm not the expert here, because Nelly, who was our battle map control in game 1, sort of after running that, sat down and went, "There's a lot of I really want to sit and polish this and tidy it," and so she did a bunch of that between game 1 and 2, and then passed that on in detail. She was game control in the next game. I moved on to a Shiva control, and she passed that on to Jess, who was our battle map control for game 2, and they really handled it. But I know there was a lot of tightening in terms of just the initial, the turn ordering for players at the map, and the way that was handled, as well as making sort of clear the number of actions and the way that you could take them. Just because, yeah, obviously, her experience and the experience of the players in game 1 at the battle map had been that it was just a little clunky to work through. The interesting side effect of this, though, that I sort of think was apparent across the game, and I'm interested in Justin's take on this actually, because we didn't talk about it after the game, was how that sort of rebalanced everything. Because I think it actually made the conflict between humanity and the Yeshiva a bit more even-sided, which sort of disincentivized the Yeshiva from going after humans, because they sort of had a first conflict with them, realized that they weren't as overpowered as they thought, and then said, "Well, our other objectives are easy to do. Let's just go do them." Is that how it sort of felt on the day, Justin?
Kinda. I mean, I had 0 interaction with the battle map during the game. It just kind of, it happened from afar, and I was aware that we were, every now and then there was combat. But yeah, I was really kind of divorced from that part of the game, so I don't have a lot
fair
I can
enough.
offer, unfortunately.
Fair enough. Yeah, that was sort of my understanding, was that it changed the balance a little bit, which sort of changed the atmosphere in the room. Because something we got really, really nice in the first game was the sense of desperation. After the Yeshiva jumped in, they obliterated half of humanity. Humanity barely got away. If you know the details of the mechanics of the game, there's this asynchronous, the turn-based combat at the map, and then sort of alongside it, there's real-time a jump timer in real time that sort of goes off, and everyone has to name when people jump. That's quite effective in terms of simulating panic and the reality of that space. So that worked well, but then if you're not as panicked about leaving, then you lose kind of that urgency, which Justin was referring to earlier.
Right. Interesting.
And so another thing that I wanted to delve into quite a bit, and we've touched on, is the trader mechanics, or the social deduction, I suppose, that comes with that. Before we sort of dive into that and how it was received, were there any major changes from the original game? I remember we were talking, Justin, and with James, about how you ran it in the original run in Wollongong, and how people having secret roles were kind of assigned on the day, that kind of thing. Did anything change in that process, or how those roles were set up in this new run?
I don't think so. Not really. The only change that I wanted to make to that whole infiltrator sphere of play was in the first run in 2019. Infiltrators were given a set of sabotage cards, but the cards were unique, so that depending on the sabotage card that a particular infiltrator had, that largely governed what kind of sabotage actions they could undertake. And this game, I wanted to transition to it being a lot more of a freeform kind of thing for infiltrators. So all of the unique cards were done away with, and there was just a single sabotage card.
Right.
That that the infiltrators would have a certain number of those cards at the start of the game, and then whenever they wanted to undertake acts of nefarious intent that that would be mechanically impactful, they would hand a certain number of those cards to a control team member. They would describe what they wanted to do, and the intent was just to allow a lot more creativity in how the infiltrators went about their infiltrating. Which
Yeah.
can be a double-edged sword, because
Yeah.
the infiltrators are, well, in my kind of construction of the game, the intent is that they're just completely randomly assigned, which that can be good, that can be bad, or perhaps you get a new player who isn't super comfortable being duplicitous and constantly going around undermining people, and so that can lead to the impact of infiltrators not being felt, and then players kind of forget, and there isn't that sense of suspicion and distrust that you try to engineer in a game like this. You want that pervasive sense of things could go wrong at any time because someone in the room with you does not have your best interests at heart.
Yeah.
That's interesting. What's the philosophy behind making it totally random like that?
Well, I know that there are. I've seen in other games and other groups where they do casting. Casting seems to be quite the popular thing to do, and I'm just not a fan of that. And then I also, on a more practical level, I don't want players to be able to kind of cheese it and saying, "Oh no, I opted out of being an infiltrator, so it can't be me."
Right.
Mm.
Take it to the meta
Yeah, and
conversation.
I don't think that would happen very often, but it would be something that could potentially derail a game, because like once someone starts weaponizing that, it can kind of undo
And it
everything.
kind of comes back
Yeah.
to the conversation around player briefs and sticking to the brief in general, because any game can have a traitor, really, or someone who goes against the brief or goes against their team for meta reasons, or just for the hell of it reasons, or they're trying to make their own fun.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah, it was just trying to minimize that, because
Sure.
I mean, yeah, that can and will happen in when you're throwing 50 people into a room together. But in my rationale was just trying to minimize stuff like that.
So I have a confession to make, Justin. In neither of the runs of our game were the infiltrators truly random.
Ooh.
Yeah.
To what degree? Well, I mean, because when
So-
we ran it in 2009, they weren't. Yeah, it wasn't truly random either. In that, when we initially did the first kind of random allocation, they ended up with 2 infiltrators on one ship, and we were like, "Oh, probably not. Let's not do that." And so we dispersed them so they were more uniform.
Yeah.
But
So
I'm interested to see what your
So we had a big long discussion about this. There was actually I won't say argument, but an intense discussion among our sort of planning team about how we were actually going to run the infiltrator, not only allocation process, but then actually letting people know that they were infiltrators. Because what sort of Justin and James had passed on to us is that when they sort of did it as people arrived, they sort of took them into a separate room, told them if they were an infiltrator or not, and gave them their starting materials. And something that we wanted to do is we actually wanted to have a chance to sort of get the individual faction control, so each control of a faction, to get to know their teams really briefly, say hi to them, settle them in, sort of coach them through around 0, and then after that, sort of use that sort of 15 minutes, 45 minutes sort of period of like getting to know them to get a vibe for who we think would be good infiltrators, not only because they'd enjoy it necessarily, but because they were in the right social positions in their team. So we actually briefed all our control that in the first sort of half an hour of getting to know people, just make a quick observation. If you think that someone's a good candidate for infiltrator, come and let sort of game control know, or let us know via Discord. We have a mods channel on Discord that we use to sort of post that around our control, and then we then sort of brought them in at the end of round 0. Got all the players to basically put their heads down, thumbs up, held their hands out, and then we carried around envelopes that had their starting materials and a little, so you're a human, this is what that means, so you're an infiltrator, this is what that means, blurb page in there for them all to read, because we had a lot of thinking as well about looking after the welfare of our infiltrators, and I'll go into that a little bit later, because there's lots of thought and discussion that happened there. But in terms of allocation, it was basically someone would say, yeah, I think this person's a good candidate, or I think this person could be a good infiltrator, but their vibe is not just right. And then sort of game control and a couple of the senior faction control would sit down. By sit down, I mean spend 20 seconds hurriedly chatting outside, going, okay, this person, infiltrators. And then we'd, write that down, make sure all the control knew who those infiltrators were going to be, as we allocated out those cards to them. And we were really conscious, obviously, that we wanted people that not only would be able to handle it throughout the day, right? They'd be sort of we sort of either knew were comfortable lying, or just in our first sort of half an hour of getting to know them, seemed like they were sort of confident enough socially to handle that. But also to make sure that we'd thrown enough spanners in the wrenches in the gears of humanity's fleet. So, maybe we picked one of the positions of authority, the president or the vice president, the fleet commander or the chief scientist, but not 3 or 2 of them, and maybe all a sort of a spread across not only ships, so not all 4 people on the prosecutor are all infiltrators, but actually making sure it's a variety of roles across a variety of ships. So maybe the captain of one ship, the crew chief of another ship, etc. So there was a good spread, and that seemed to work really, really well. We had some really good feedback from players that they, the second they opened their thing and found out they were an infiltrator, they started, like in a good way, being stressed the whole day, being like, everybody knows instantly everything about me, and that was a really thrilling and engaging result for them, which really pleased us.
Yeah, that's really clever.
Yeah.
I do have to ask though, was it a conscious decision not to put any infiltrators on my team?
There was an infiltrator on. No, we discussed it. We started. So no. We had a long discussion about it. Actually, this was before the game with you guys, because we knew you guys were coming. And it turned out that the other big decision we had to make is who the president was at the start of the game.
Yeah.
And because what we did is we said, this person's the president, and the president chooses their starting vice president, fleet commander, and chief scientist. But we had like a suggested, if you're president, these are the potential positions on other ships that we would suggest, just from like the lore of each of those ships. We did like a 1-page lore briefing on, each of the ships is this thing. And we found that the president, the role that we gave the president to, actually had almost the most stressful experience, not just picking those things, but then being the president and playing their game in the first game. And so we thought, well, okay, we won't necessarily go with infiltrator, but we gave Katie, who was on your ship, the president, and that sort of, as evidenced by her reaction when she finally was assassinated at some point, or had the presidency stolen from her, not assassinated, deposed. She was like, basically, thank goodness, finally it's happened.
Yeah, well, that was Nelly came up to like the 4 of us outside, and she was like, "Your team has the presidency. Who do you want to be president?" And then we all picked Katie, because we knew she would be the most stressed,
and probably like go the maddest with power, I imagine.
Yeah, we were hoping, the maximum chaos play.
So it kind of sounds like what you did was sort of soft casting almost.
Yeah.
I guess the theme of the game sort of suggests that there's going to be traders, but did you implicitly let people know that not necessarily that process was going to happen, but there might be that sewn into the game, or were people sort of blind?
No, we explicitly told people that there were traders. That's in the rules that they read. So they understood the trader mechanics as well. The trader mechanics were in the human rulebook. That's from the first round of the game. I can't claim credit for that. Which is useful. And actually, it posed some really interesting mechanical questions for us as well, because there was this whole point of captains can imprison someone on their ship if they for any reason. The captain can just say, "Throw this person in the brig," and then and we can talk about the whole like how we manage that and welfare of people being in prison. That's something I really would like to get to later. But then once they've imprisoned someone, captains have the ability to like search them and take their cards and look at them. And so someone in our control briefing, actually, one of our control asked, so what's stopping me as a player imprisoning everyone on my ship one by one, looking through their cards, finding the sabotage cards, and then knowing who my infiltrators are immediately? And we're like, damn, that's a really good question, actually. Like, I don't have an answer for that until we came up with, well, hang on, why don't we just randomly seed sabotage cards throughout everyone? So as part of the starting materials, we were like, yeah, this person has a sabotage card. Like, we just allocated sabotage cards out to random people as part of their starting materials. So even regular human players had sabotage cards. And so if someone was like, well, I'm going to imprison someone and look for their sabotage cards, we're like, cool, but that doesn't mean that they're an infiltrator. Like, it can be, you can make that assumption, but just because someone's got like a bomb, like in reality, like if someone's manufactured a bomb, it doesn't mean they're an infiltrator. It just means that they've got a bomb. Like, that could be any number of reasons for that. And sabotage card, like, it could be not just a bomb. It could be, radio tools because they're a hobbyist radio person, or like whatever it is, right? Things that can be used to sabotage the fleet in this, in the vacuum of space are actually plentiful. They're things that people just have.
Yeah, I was actually really glad that something like that happened, because the the night before the game, James and I both like arrived at that realization.
Yep.
We were like, oh no, oh no, the game is broken.
It sounds like it was relatively well received in general, how the trader mechanics, but I have to ask, one thing that we've discussed a few times before, both with player death and with traders and secret roles, that kind of thing, is that it can sometimes throw players if they knew it was in the game, but if they rocked up on the day and didn't realize it was going to be them, and they just spent 2 weeks getting to know these new people and talking to them, that kind of thing. Did you have sort of an opt-out process, or did you have a process where people could help navigate that secret role, or did they all just embrace it?
No, so part of the soft casting kind of knew that. But also, so we spoke quite at length about the welfare of infiltrators. So I'm going to be a pump our own tires here for a bit, but at Melbourne, I think we do a really great job of managing player welfare throughout the day. We have a dedicated welfare control. It's their job to sort of go around and pounce on things proactively. But something we really honestly assessed was, if someone looks like they're not having a good time, we know they're an infiltrator. We just need to, keep an eye on those players and check in on them, particularly right from the get-go. And like, we told our welfare explicitly, if they look like they want to opt out of being infiltrator, they're 10 seconds into having read their infiltrator card, we can see they're visibly shitting themselves. Let's take that away. We can always sort of look after their time at the game. If someone had a good time at the game, then, sitting there and not feeling paralyzed with all of the pressure of being an infiltrator. And to all of their credit, all of our infiltrators throughout both days had an excellent time of it. Like, they were stressed, but they all really leapt into it feet first and embraced the infiltrator life. And it was pretty explicit, I think, in the rules, and also the way that we started the day. Like, we structured and we said, at this point we'll give you your role cards, and people, if they're infiltrators, will find out then. We made it quite clear and signposted, I think, how the day was going to run, so that you knew that it was likely that it was possible that you could become an infiltrator, and when that would happen, how that would happen.
Yeah. That was just echoing Tristan's kind of sentiment there. One of the things that I'm really not a fan of in mega games is the kind of the sleeper agent mechanic, where you can get halfway through the game and have your allegiance change. I really don't like that. So a conscious part of the design of So Say We All is that it's signposted that this is a game that has trader mechanics in it, but your allegiance is not going to change over the course of the day. From game start, you will be team A or team B, and that will be, and I try to communicate that, clearly I didn't do it this time because I wasn't running it, but, in all the pre-game, anytime you're talking about pre-game things and the social aspects of the game, well, in 2019 anyway, we mentioned there were traders. We mentioned it repeatedly. And it was explicit in the rules. The trader rule, the trader mechanics are present in the regular human rule book, because you don't want players to get there and then be ambushed with this additional part of the game. But also, and yeah, but also it is kind of, it's a Battlestar Galactica game. I would hope that most people who are aware of the source material would expect something like that to be part of the game. Obviously, that's not going to be true for all players. Some people will just see Mega Game, great, and they'll buy a ticket. But yeah, it's just kind of, again, trying to minimize the chance of people being blindsided with this, revelation.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'll just pile on that. Something that we do at Melbourne and we're trying to keep doing is imposing like the idea of looking after all of these players, all of our players throughout the day at different times, right? So not just when people find out that they're an infiltrator, how that affects them, but if someone is accused of being an infiltrator, how's that going to affect them, right? If they're a human, like we literally sat down and had conversations. If someone is accused of being an infiltrator, what are we going to do that that's part of the game. That's a good part of the game. We want that to happen. If they are an infiltrator, great. Then someone's found them. If they're not an infiltrator, then that's some interesting conflict. That's good. That's designed. That's part of the design. But we need to look after their welfare, right? If that makes them, someone's anxious about that, and then that happens, and they start having a bad day, we need to know that to be on the lookout for that. And so we had as part of our briefing, we sort of had a whole discussion with our control about preserving those people's enjoyment of the day, and sort of centered ourselves. We sort of dug deep into the design. This is something I haven't actually spoken to Justin about, but it's something we started doing on a bunch of our games, and I have to give credit to the rest of the team here. I haven't come up with this, but identifying the values for a game, highlighting those to control, and then sort of giving them actionable approaches to problems based on those values. So we sort of came up with 4 values for So Say We All. This is all done by us without talking to Justin and James, based on our reading of the material. And those values were, just for your interest, intrigue and distrust, first one. Deception and treachery is the second one. Hope is the third one. And the fourth one is high stakes. And those resulted in a set of guidelines to control, which were, if you don't know what to do, refer to refusing certainty and offering interpretable information. So don't say this thing works or doesn't work, but it's like it gives you a yellow light. The yellow light says yes, but what does yes mean? Number 2, ensuring the right of reply. This is a really big one when it comes to this welfare point. If something happens to a player, they need to have the ability to do something about it. If someone is imprisoned, they need an ability to respond, either send a message to their friends or the opportunity to escape or damage something on their way to prison. The third one was redirecting towards the big picture, right? Making sure that people are still aware that the big picture is happening around them. So if they get imprisoned, there's still hope, right? Their friends will come and save them, or they've got the ability to affect the wider picture somehow. And fourth, requiring significant investment. So, that's the high stakes part of it. If you want to imprison someone, you can't just kind of do that. There has to be some significant investment to allow you to achieve an outcome, right? There's a political or a moral kickback there that you need to respond to. And so that was sort of not just our welfare control was aware of that, but all control had that, and actually had that in the back of their lanyards throughout the day to refer to if they wanted to. And I think that meant that when people, were getting near to experiencing a tough time or sort of felt like their day had stalled, we were able to leap on that quite effectively, because it wasn't just 1 or 2 of us that were aware of it. It was the whole control team was really hyper aware of doing that and being on top of that.
I love that approach. It reminds me a lot of the kind of GM guidelines or principles from a lot of indie RPGs, or Apocalypse World has this concept. That seems like a really great way to keep everyone on the same page. I wonder, did you have anything similar for the players? A lot of these games have like a player principle idea that the players should abide by, like taking risks or things like that.
I don't think so. There was nothing like overt like that, unless there was something at the start of the rules that I've just kind of, it's passed into the back half of my brain because it's in the rules and I've read them so much. But there was nothing that we wrote for that. Yeah.
That's interesting, but I love that. That's awesome. I'm really glad that player welfare was so front and center in those discussions. That's definitely a big. Now, I haven't personally played in a traitor-focused mega game yet, but it's definitely been a big concern of mine. That welfare aspect, because traitor games are a very high intensity emotional experience when you're being accused of lying.
Absolutely.
or you have to lie to someone to their face. That is an extremely intense experience. And I've definitely had that moment where in a trader game where you're pretty much outed as a traitor, or everyone thinks you're a traitor, and so they're like, "We're not going to listen to anything you say. Get out of here, traitor!"
Yeah.
And that's sort of very, and you feel like you're kind of stonewalled out. Very intense experience, even if it's just an hour-long game, and obviously, yeah, a full day-long game. That could be crazy. So I'd love to hear. You've kind of alluded to this a bit, but the imprisoning system and how that all worked. I'd love to hear how how you decided to tackle that one with player welfare in mind.
Yeah, so in the game as it's written, captains just have the right to imprison someone on the ship, right? They can order them imprisoned, and then they are imprisoned. Now it's also, and this was written into the game before in the first iteration, that a person escapes at the end of the turn, basically, if they haven't had something occur to them while they're in prison, right? Whatever, like if they haven't had a sort of a resolution. And so we sort of took that idea and ran with it a little bit and said, well, okay, if you're going to imprison someone, there's likelihood that there'll be, problems on your ship from that, right? Because they have a faction of people that support them, or they will, if it's not their ship, if there's someone visiting, right? If you're on the prosecutor and you're from the say the Constantine, or the Pope is visiting the prosecutor, it's not the Pope, religious leader Zed is visiting the prosecutor. Then and you imprison them, well, actually, that ship is going to have a whole problem with you, right? Because you've imprisoned their friend without their crewmate, without having any sort of justification for it, and you need to produce us, right? We spoke about what would be the actual consequences for that in the real world, and let's represent that mechanically by either giving that person chances to escape or imposing detrimental events onto the ship that's done the imprisoning. Various items like that. We looked at the different levers that we pull. In terms of how that mechanically actually resolved, so often it's pretty straightforward. The captain would say, I imprison this person, they're imprisoned. We sort of immediately, the control member that was at the table would wave over another control member and get usually the welfare or game control or whichever control was free to sort of sit with the person that's been imprisoned and make sure they knew what was happening to them as they were being imprisoned, whilst the faction control that was running the table sort of spoke to the people doing the imprisonment about what do you want to get out of this. You're aware you're aware that there will be consequences for your actions here, right? Make them aware so they really make sure it's the choice they want to make. Because if they are making this choice, we wanted to be sure it was something that they knew they were doing and understood what it would probably do to them. And then give that other player the right to reply, right? So say, okay, you're being imprisoned, that's going to happen to you. You have either the opportunity to escape at the end of the turn, this is what will happen, make it really clear that you understand this is the process, this is what's going to happen, but these are some actions you can take. These are still the things that you can do, because we found that something, and this is something that player death also sort of gets at me, so I don't want to delve into that whole can of worms, but being disempowered, right? Players feeling like they can't do anything is actually the most frustrating thing in the world. If something happens to you, and you can do something about it, that's fine. That's just another part of the game, right? Like it might piss you off, but that's still interesting and good and can tell you great stories. And so, yeah, we actually had some really great stories come out of that where players were falsely imprisoned by people that thought they were infiltrators and they weren't actually an infiltrator, but they got the chance to send messages to their friends. Their friends came and proved their innocence by finding the actual infiltrator. And that led to some really interesting and fun storytelling. And that's why I think we sort of universally had brilliant feedback from both infiltrators and people that weren't infiltrators that were trying to figure out who the infiltrators were about that part of the game. That it really nailed both the tension of not trusting people as well as the sort of panic of being accused and then the ability to respond to that.
Amazing. That's so good to hear. That's that type of system is such a what's the word? It can be such a pain point.
Yeah.
Exactly, like getting killed, getting imprisoned. It's awesome that so many people felt like that was the highlight. That's awesome.
And the welfare stuff as well, just with how people approach those tricky conversations and encounters, I feel is really important, even outside the trader mechanic and the hidden agents mechanic, that kind of thing. We've definitely had games in Sydney with tensions getting very high where people are, taking the politicking to a certain level. And it doesn't need to be that people are to turn on each other or whatever else. They just disagree and they follow that path, and it leads to tension. And it's always good to have some like a framework in place.
Yeah, you throw in actual mechanical backstabbing of each other, and then it gets like, you're almost guaranteed to go down that path, right?
Right.
And it happened both games, and that's why, we were really sure to scaffold it carefully, which was good. And I have to give a really a couple of shout outs here. One is actually something that we're pushing is it feels a bit insane at times, but having high control to player ratios. So we had 14 control for this game, the 13, 14 control across different days. One of those was a photographer on one of the days. So, but that let us have the spare hand around to help us do things, right? So it was when you've got 11 player teams, you sort of have, 2 or 3 teams to a control member for the player controls, and then game control and map control and a Shiva control and a Shiv and welfare control. And at that point, that's where you're already getting to those numbers. But it let us make sure that each control could really give attention to the teams that right? And that meant that when there was a situation where something big like this was happening, someone was being imprisoned, oftentimes we could flag over a control that was sort of in a low ebb of their game's busyness, right? It might be map control, could be welfare control, and have them help handle the situation, which meant that a player not only didn't feel like something bad was happening to them, they couldn't do anything about it, but they had someone that was their direct conduit for resolving, right? If you're getting imprisoned, not only do you have someone you can talk to that will tell you what's happening, but if there's someone that you've got there's someone that was managing the situation for you directly, and that's really important.
Awesome. So it sounds like the game was received really well. Did you get any specific feedback, or did you do any post game surveys? How did it all turn out in the end, do you feel?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, did we get any feedback? I think one thing that we can all agree on is that the mega game community is not a quiet one. And that's a really good thing, whether it be at the pub afterwards where there were some very robust conversations. I think, but at the end of the second game, the pub afterwards, Justin didn't want to talk about this game anymore. People had given him so many opinions on it. I'm joking a little bit. We had some really great feedback and engagement. Overall, we're super happy with how the run. Like it was, we would very happily run that game again in a few years' time once the dust settled and people have had a chance to play other games. And I think almost universally the mechanical tweaks we made, particularly before game 1, but between even game 1 and game 2, were universally like fairly well received. Or if not well received, then we know exactly why that was. A specific kind of one change we made was a tick too far in one direction. We're super happy with the game. There has been some people in our community that have sort of gone really detailed down a rabbit hole and produced whole dossiers of feedback and their dissection of the game. And we're slowly passing them on to Justin once we sort of rationalize them ourselves and go, do we, necessarily think this is valuable feedback? And most of it is. Like, these people have great ideas, and we're really lucky to have them in our community. And I think there's a really interesting thematic discussion that was had around the game about what themes it nails from BSG and what parts of BSG it really feels like, and other parts where it maybe diverges some more and, does its own thing thematically. And that's an interesting conversation, I think, that's sort of still ongoing, not only in our community, but then, sort of back to Justin and Jack and Justin and James that we had. It started at the pub and sort of has kept going. Of course, we did sort of a post-game survey, and we're still digesting the results of that.
How did you find that feedback, Justin, especially compared to running it 2 years prior? How did you find the changes were received, and did they sort of achieve what you expected them to?
Yeah, I think they did. I was trying to think. I wouldn't say that, aside from the changes we made to the Ashiva team and their motivations and that whole thematic part of the game, I wouldn't say there was any kind of large changes that were made. It was more kind of smaller, subtle things, as opposed to big things that I would say would impact the game in a really noticeable way that you could kind of, or at least that I could starkly tell there was a different player experience between 2019 and 2023.
Right.
It was pretty much the same.
The one I can think of potentially is the mobility requirement and the shuttles and players moving around.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that one.
That's probably the biggest change. That was absolutely universally well received, I think. In terms of in the first run back in 2019, players had to have cards, like a physical shuttle, fly them between tables, but each table was a ship in the vacuum of space. and sort of abandoning that and using shuttles as a resource, but you could just move between tables sort of at your will, was really quite powerful. Because it let us then, when we did break down the space, the activation of space, by either stopping people from going to a certain table because that table, was no longer, that ship had jumped away and was in a different room, or physically, preventing people going to a ship because it had locked its doors and wasn't letting people go there now. That made those moments particularly powerful, which happened across both games.
Interesting. Because I never attended the original run, so I haven't played this game yet. But I remember when we first had that conversation, Justin, with James, and we're talking about the shuttle stuff, and I was really interested. It wasn't the only example where this game, with similar DNA to the renowned Den of Wolves game, which is I think a UK creation and is based on the same subject matter.
Yeah, John Mizon's game.
Yeah. I played that in Wellington, and I was always amazed at when I came back here. I'd never spoken to Justin and James about Den of Wolves in any level of detail, I don't think, and they still came up with the same mechanic where Den of Wolves had the same thing where it was moving. You had to take shuttles physically from place to place, and I remember it being a real pinch point in Den of Wolves, at least the one that I played, when the enemy attacked, because at that point everything would go into sort of turn basis, and players would have to move in order, I suppose. Like, you couldn't just free run around just because you had a shuttle. It impacted where you would end up on which ship that you would end up on during a battle or an attack if they were to jump away, and so you might end up with a different crew somewhere else and that kind of thing. I always found that really fascinating. So it's interesting that you shifted away from that and it sort of was well received. But it sounds like you've got other ways of moving people around.
Yeah, well, I mean, that situation you've described is exactly what I was hoping to create in the initial run of the game. Like that. Yeah, just the sense that, you could be marooned on a different ship because you just happen to be doing, this task at this time. But it never really eventuated, and it seemed it was just a net detriment. It was just causing more frustration as opposed to creating those kinds of interesting moments where, teams are temporarily jumbled around.
Yeah, I'll admit in Wellington in practice it was a bit of a messy. It was a cool idea to think about, but it was messy in how it was executed, as you can imagine. There's just a bunch of people running around with little things, and everyone's just assuming that they have what they need to be able to fly around.
I need to call out that we still actually got that same result though in both games, even without the sort of, you can't move around between tables in the short space, but over the long form of the game, players split the fleets, right? They for some reason either they abandoned a ship as they jumped away, or a bunch of people deliberately left the human fleet. A bunch of ships deliberately left the fleet in the second game, and that created those moments where sort of, one person got trapped on a ship as it jumped away because they were just there talking to someone and the ship jumped, and so you still got those moments and those interesting narrative things where this person's like, I guess I'm on this adventure now. This is my story, which people, I think, ultimately had fun with. We sort of got some mixed feedback about those experiences, actually.
And so I guess, wary of time, Justin, I did want to ask where you're at now, having designed the game originally, run it. You had a lot in your head about what you'd like to tweak and change. Then you've gone through this process with Melbourne, Tristan and the gang, looking at ways to tweak it, and now you've actually played it. Are you happy with the way the game lands now, or you want to keep tinkering?
No, there's definitely more things I want to change.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if any game that anyone designs will ever be 100% complete in their own mind. But no, there are definitely some additional things I would like to work into this game. Most of them are kind of trying to. Well, they're born from my experience playing this game, as opposed to a preconceived idea that I had going in. There are still a few of those, but they're pretty minor. I would say the larger changes that I still would like to make, they're all kind of fresh from my experience actually playing it.
Are you willing to talk about any of the big changes you'd like to make, or?
Yeah, sure. I
Right.
think there's two. There's two that sit front and center, and I'm sure there are others, but just these are the two that I keep thinking about. I keep flirting with the idea of disposing of the Yeshiva team altogether. and
Ah.
not having another team in another room.
Mm.
Still having infiltrators in the fleet, but having attacks on the fleet be directly perpetrated by the infiltrators rather than the Yeshiva team happening to locate them in the
Mm.
galaxy.
Mm.
Which is the model that Dead of Wolves runs with, at least the version that I played in.
Oh, no,
It's
scrap
all-
it then.
Keep them different.
From memory, the whole enemy team, the wolves were run by the control team, and it was a pacing mechanic basically. So they would attack the fleet in a certain way with a certain strength when it was needed to push things along. Which sounds a bit cynical of me, but that's really what they were doing.
Oh,
But then the infiltrators were there as well, so I don't think the infiltrators could totally control the attacks, but they were there to sow the mayhem during the peaceful
Yeah,
moments.
so I do. That was the first thing that kind of came to mind when I thought about this idea of potentially getting rid of the Ashiva players. Is that then does it? I don't want it to just become arbitrary and just
Right.
introducing an attack on the fleet just because. I think I will. I don't know. I think I would have it so that it's still entirely player driven. Like an infiltrator can send out a signal or I don't know, whatever it may be, to
Mm.
trigger that attack occurring as a so that it's still it feels meaningful to the infiltrators. So that's one thing I'm thinking of, and that was kind of born out of a discussion I had with Tristan and Leon after the game,
Mm.
and they were telling me about the kind of very different experience. Or the vibe in the room between games 1 and 2 in Melbourne. Game 1, as I understand it, had this very lovely, pervasive atmosphere of desperation and fear because the Shiva would show up and they would cause damage and everyone would be a mad scramble to get away from them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Whereas in the second game, things on at least on that front felt very relaxed. Like no mega game is ever relaxed; it's always chaos. But there wasn't this constant fear of attack from the Ashiva, and I think that it comes down to when we introduce the two factions in the Ashiva, whoever has the biggest personality in the room will probably end up getting their way most of the time. And in game 2, possibly that was that one of the what do we call them? One of the shepherd
Shepherds.
players.
Yeah.
They kind of won the room more often than not. So there wasn't this oppressive, relentless
Let's blow them
force
away.
pursuing the fleet and
Right.
chipping away at them all the time. It was the attacks were very infrequent.
Mm.
And so there were times where kind of the fleet was just kind of, I want to say idyllic, but again, it's always chaotic because people are scrambling for resources and there's the infiltrators, but the fleet never felt pressured to kind of continue progressing the overarching goal of of getting back to a safe haven somewhere. It was so that was the main reason why I was thinking about possibly doing this, is that it might help to kind of maintain the tension in a way that's not this double-edged sword of just having two teams of players in a secret room kind of butting heads to drive what I think is a pretty critical aspect of the game. But I don't know. That's just that idea is still very much in its infancy, so I might decide that that's terrible and leave things as is. And then the other one is I just want to have other avenues for teams to get resources.
Right.
So in So Say We All, resource production is very asymmetric. There are food ships that produce food, there are fuel ships that produce fuel, and then there are the civilian ships that don't produce anything, but they have an excess of crew, so they can farm their people out to other ships. So that and that way, kind of each of the ships, and then there's the prosecutor, but each of the ships kind of intrinsically has something to offer that the rest of the ships don't. But that can, as players had indicated, after game 1 in Melbourne, and then as I was observing during game 2, that can become kind of stale. Like once the status quo gets established, and you know that you can always talk to food ship B to get your food and fuel ship A to get your fuel, you will settle into this rhythm. And that's one thing I want to try to introduce avenues to break that, so that things are kind of in this constant state of evolution, so that players don't fall into a routine and kind of begin that slow, insidious spiral of disengagement.
Mm. With the issue of having two teams, two alien teams, I've had a very similar thing with our game We Are Not Alone, where we split the aliens into two teams essentially, and we had an issue where this wasn't our intent, but one of them ended up being seen as the evil team and one as the good team, and so it kind of ended up with everyone in the mega game just ganging up on that one half of the aliens who were seen as the evil team, which obviously wasn't the best experience for them. So I think, yeah, it's definitely something I want to have another crack at myself. I think it can work very well. It's just quite, I would say, a difficult thing to get the balance quite right.
Yeah, I think you've got to really walk the line with having their two. You want their two goals to be conflicting, but not so much that they're pulling in opposite directions. You want the net result of whatever they do. You know, in this case, for So Say We All, I think you want the net result is still we need to attack the humans, or you know, some variation thereof, as opposed to. Yeah, I think Tristan, we may have gone too far with having them be too kind of opposing this time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I also don't know how much of that was the like their reluctance to attack, and the atmosphere in the second game was their sort of experience from the first combat, and you know how they felt about that. It's interesting. I think there's interesting space to tweak there.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of it always comes down as well to the player base. I remember this year being 2023. Being the first time I ran 2 games with God Emperor. We ran it twice. And they had totally different feels as well, with different... I don't know, one game was very, very passive, and there was a real reluctance for people to fight on the map and that kind of thing, whereas the other game was arguably stacked with sort of the veteran Megagame crowd, and they were at each other's throats from the get-go. So I think as much as you design teams to act a certain way, the crowd is always going to shift and interpret everything a certain way that changes up the flow of the game.
That's true, but I think that's always what you want. You want that kind of the secret sauce that the players bring to just throw that curveball in there.
100%.
Definitely, 100%. So, well, thank you so much, both of you, for coming on.
Thank you for having me again.
Awesome. Justin, if there are other people who are interested in checking out or potentially running So Say We All, is that something that they can contact you about, or are there any options there?
They're welcome to contact me. Probably the best way to do that is via the Adelaide Megagames email, which is just AdelaideMegagames@gmail.com. Flick us an email on there, and then I'll get in touch and we'll see what we can do. Hopefully it won't, I won't turn around and say, oh, it'll be a 9-month lead time like it was for Tristan and the Melbourne guys.
Fingers crossed.
But you never know.
No, well, thank you both. Where can everyone find you? Tristan, down at Melbourne?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for the conversation, guys. We are melbournemegagames.com. That's Melbourne Megagames, all sort of one word, .com is our fancy website. That has links to all of our socials and there. You can also email us at contact@melbournemegagames.com if you've got any questions or want to get in touch about anything you've heard today. I also do want to give a quick shout out in particular to the logistics team that helped us run both these games. So Melbourne Megagames is currently me, Tristan Cliff, Yolanda Diamantis, Nelly Seal, and Leon Obranov. But in particular, we had fantastic help from Hugo and Jess from our community. And in particular, I want to give a massive thanks to Hugo for his awesome visual design that he did. He redesigned a bunch of the materials, sort of making the new stuff that we came up with and shot into the world, really prettied them up. So that was fantastic. And also need to give a thank you to Chrissy, who did all the 3D printing for this game, because that made us possible to run it and look so beautiful. If you're interested in seeing photos of this run, by the way, they are on our socials, so I encourage you to check them out.
Awesome, thank you, and we will link to those below. Any last words?
So say we all.
So say we all.
Go.